In our last lesson, Jesus was on trial, and he has been beaten, mocked, jeered at, scoffed at, and now he's being taken out to be crucified. We concluded with him, with Simon the Cyrene carrying his cross out to his crucifixion site. Luke 23, verses 32 through 34 say this. 2 other criminals were also taken to be executed with Jesus. When they arrived at the place called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there, along with one criminal on each side of him. From the cross, Jesus spoke, "Father, forgive them, because they do not understand what they are doing." They divided Jesus' clothes by casting lots. All right, several thoughts in those 3 verses. The skull is just outside of Jerusalem, and it's a hillside named because of its appearance. There's 2 caves that are kind of sunken in like eyeballs or eye sockets, and a protuberance like a nose, a little bit of a chin, a big forehead. You can find pictures of it. I have one in my notes. It's called the Skull. In Aramaic, the name is, and one you probably heard, Golgotha, which means the place of the skull in Aramaic. Jewish religious traditions did not allow executions within Jerusalem itself, so this is where they took place. Now, many preachers have made a big deal about the symbolism of Jesus having 2 criminals crucified next to him, and some of those references seem outstanding and or interesting and or valid. In just a couple of verses, we're going to discuss the differing attitudes of those 2 criminals. Almost said 2 Christians. Whoops. Hopefully you're going to take some time to think about how these 2 men would have felt. I mean, consider how the presence of Jesus might have made things better for them. They're being crucified. How they could have been made worse? They're being crucified. I mean, but still, better and worse could be in quotes, because these men are about to be executed. And then how do you interpret Jesus saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not understand what they are doing"? Of whom was he speaking? I'll give you a multiple choice quiz here. Was he speaking about the Jewish religious leaders? Maybe. Or the Jewish people in general? Possibly. How about the Roman soldiers? Yeah, maybe. How about the criminals crucified with him? We're going to see them, one of them, take an attitude with him. How about a combination of those, or all of those? Or none of those? Or how about, I don't know. I'll give you a hint with no value to it. Luke is the only gospel that gives us this quote. What have you been taught regarding this statement? Father, forgive them, for they do not understand what they are doing. Have you ever considered the significance of this in context of what's happening right here? I mean, we know he's hanging on the cross, okay? And they're about to divide his clothes by casting lots. Hopefully you've spent a little time thinking about this. I'll give you one final hint, my personal opinion. Any one of those multiple choice answers could apply. We just don't know. The Bible doesn't specify. We have to think about it. Like I say, read the Bible with your mind open. Not paying attention so much to what you already have been taught, but to what you read for yourself. Think about it. Verse 35, the people stood watching, and the rulers jeered at Jesus. They dramatically and loudly said, "He saved others. If he is God's chosen Messiah, let him save himself." Now, close your eyes and imagine you're standing there at this time. Can you see some people just standing there watching? Can you see the Jewish leaders in their beautiful robes, mocking Jesus. Can you imagine them being overly dramatic? And do you understand the fallacy of their challenge? He saved others. If he's God's chosen Messiah, let him save himself. You know, throughout history, many have challenged God by saying things like, if God exists, I demand he strike me dead by lightning right now. Does that make sense? I mean, you know, when I was a young man, I went to a debate between an atheist and a Christian regarding evolution. And the atheist's strongest point made was, if there is a God, may he strike me dead right now for cursing him and denying his existence. Is it fair to compare this to a situation such as, you know, a 6-year-old challenges a police officer and says, I can beat you up, and if you don't beat me up right now, I'm going to call you a chicken. I'm going to say I'm stronger than you. Does a police officer really have to accept that challenge? Of course not. And neither does God have to respond to human challenges. Don't ever let anyone use that argument against God. The soldiers also, in verses 36 and 37, the soldiers also mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and told him, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. Sure, they're parroting the Jewish religious leaders. Roman soldiers. Okay. And oh, by the way, vinegar, sour wine. What was Jesus offered? It's an issue that involves translations and culture. The King James says they offered him vinegar. The NIV says they offered him wine vinegar. The New Living Translation says they offered him a drink of sour wine. Vinegar, wine vinegar, sour wine. They do not mean bad wine. It's simply a description of the type of wine they gave him. The Greek word used, it actually means literally vinegar. This was a drink the Roman soldiers and many other people in the Middle East carried and drank themselves. It was rather strong, and they would normally dilute it with water when they went to drink it. Understand that water in the Middle East can often be rather stale tasting and quite full of bacteria, frankly. So fermented beverages, referred to as wine or vinegar, depending on the degree of fermentation, those were normal in their culture. So go back to John chapter 2, the wedding feast where Jesus turned water into wine. That's why. Wine was more palatable than most of the water. Okay, verse 38. They posted a sign over Jesus. It said, "This is the King of the Jews." Now in John 19, the Jewish religious leaders objected to that. And they told Pilate, we want it changed to say he claimed to be the King of the Jews. And Pilate said, I posted what I posted. You can deal with it. Do you think Pilate was kind of jabbing him with that? I believe he might have. What do you think? Remember, they kind of pushed him into this in the first place. All right, verses 39 to 42. 2 criminals. I told you we'd come back to them. One of the criminals hanging there was hurling insults at Jesus, saying things like, "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and both of us too." The other criminal, and probably many other things, but the other criminal in verse 40, the other criminal rebuked him, said, "Don't you fear God? You have also been sentenced to crucifixion. We are guilty and getting what we deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." That man then asked Jesus to remember him when he entered his kingdom. Do you think the 2 criminals represent the 2 sides of human nature? I mean, some people accept God, some people reject God. Something to think about. There's some good sermons about that. I'm not going to do one of them now. Verse 43, Jesus told the man, "I am truthfully telling you, you will join me in paradise today." Okay, so now there are differing opinions regarding this man's immediate and future fate. Theologians just love to debate, sarcasm intended. One thing we do know is that Jesus told this man they would be together in paradise today. Think about that. Did Jesus mean today in the sense that we use that word? That word can mean today as in a time period or an epoch. We use it that way sometimes. And after all, Jesus would die and then not ascend to the Father until after seeing Mary in the garden, John chapter 20. That would have been on the third day. This is where you need to understand that God does not look at things the same way we do. We have seen that more than once when looking at our physical world without seeing it from a spiritual perspective. Let's remember that God is outside of our limitations, and that includes time. He created time. He is not governed by time. Okay, 44 through 46. Oh, I love this. This happened about noon, and darkness covered the entire land till 3 p.m. The sun stopped shining. During that time, the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus cried out very loudly, "Father, I commit my spirit into your hands." After saying that, he took his last breath. Now think about this. Total darkness. Not sort of dark, but Luke writes, the sun stopped shining. We're not considering cloud cover here. I mean, I know the pictures all show big dark thunder clouds, the whole sky dark. I don't know if clouds really mattered. I think maybe it was a clear, sunny day. I'd like to believe that. And then all of a sudden there's no sun. And since there's no moon shining during the day, it was total darkness for 3 hours. How impressive and terrifying that must have been for 3 hours. Now, during that time, the curtain of the temple was torn in two. That's what Luke wrote. He doesn't tell us exactly when the temple curtain was torn in two. What have you been taught? When do you believe the temple curtain was torn in two? Mark's gospel doesn't give us any information regarding when the curtain was torn. However, Matthew 27 verse 51 tells us the curtain was torn in two at the end of the 3 hours. If you knew that, give yourself a gold star. And then Jesus cried out loudly, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And he took his last breath. Have you ever thought about that verse? It seems to symbolize that Jesus willingly died when he was ready. Do you ever think about that? All right, verse 47 through 49 now. This is another really nice passage. I love this one. The Roman commander saw all of this happen, and he gave God praise and said, "This was a righteous man for sure." All of the people who had gathered to watch the crucifixion saw what had happened. They beat on their breasts and left. Those who knew and followed Jesus, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, all stood at a distance, watching everything. All right, so the Roman commander gave God praise and said this was a righteous man for sure. What do you believe convinced him? I mean, everything? The 3 hours of dark. Or maybe just Jesus' demeanor. Something to think about. Think about Jesus' followers in the moments after he died. Apparently other people were impressed. They beat their breasts and said, "Oh." That's what they did to indicate disapproval or sorrow. But Jesus' followers, it says, all stood at a distance, watching everything. How do you think they felt? Were some of them in shock because they didn't believe he could die? Maybe, probably. Were some confused? No doubt. Do you believe any of them were celebrating? I don't think so. See, what Jesus taught was so radical that even his closest followers did not understand, or they would not have been overcome with grief. Do you get the point? But isn't that still true today? Christians often are totally overwhelmed at the death of a loved one. Even church leaders sometimes struggle to deal with the death of someone close to them. I know a church leader, he wasn't a pastor, but he was an elder, and he fell apart when his father, a born-again Christian minister, believer, died. And he fell apart. That shouldn't be, dear Christians. Some are so overwhelmed with grief they're unable to function. It shouldn't happen that way for us. Of course, we can grieve our loss. I've done funerals for people so close to me it hurt, and I had trouble not crying. But assuming the one we love died as a believer, we should rejoice for them and sorrow for our loss. As I said at the beginning of this chapter, what a horrible and wonderful day. Jesus was crucified, and that was horrible. But without that crucifixion, we would have no salvation. Jesus was crucified on Good Friday. Good? Because he died for your sins and mine. All right, verses 50 through 54. A member of the Sanhedrin named Joseph was a good and righteous man. He had not agreed with the decision of the Sanhedrin. He did not agree with what they did. He came from Arimathea of Judea. He was anxiously awaiting for God's kingdom. Joseph went to Pilate and requested permission to bury Jesus' body. He took Jesus' body off the cross, wrapped it in fine linen, and then put his body in a tomb cut in rock, a tomb that had never been used. It was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. Now, Matthew 27:57 and John 19:38 both tell us that Joseph was a believer in Jesus. Mark and Luke both call him righteous or godly. So Joseph went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Many have made a point about how brave Pilate was to go to Pilate, because admitting he was a follower of Jesus might have been dangerous. I mean, John 19:39 tells us Nicodemus accompanied Joseph, and having two members of the Sanhedrin would have given them some standing with Pilate. However, when the Pharisees found out about what they had done, life might have become difficult, to say the least. In fact, historical records outside of the Bible tell us that Nicodemus was removed from the Sanhedrin not too long after this, and that was not done very often. There's no mention of Joseph being removed from the Sanhedrin. That does not mean he wasn't removed. But they deserve a great deal of respect for preparing Jesus' body for burial. And by the way, Joseph was of Arimathea, was a very wealthy man according to the Bible and other historical documents. History tells us that he went to Britain to minister there. History tells us nothing about Nicodemus after the burial of Jesus, except that he was removed from the Sanhedrin. So verses 55 and 56. The women who had followed Jesus from Galilee now followed Joseph to the tomb and saw how Jesus' body was laid. They went home and prepared spices and perfumes to anoint his body, but they rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the law of Moses. As mentioned before, there were multiple women who had followed Jesus from Galilee. It would have been an arduous and lengthy journey for women, men too, but worse for the women. And some of those women evidently knew about Joseph and Nicodemus burying Jesus, so they followed so they would know where Jesus had been buried. And we'll see just a few verses from now that they wanted to anoint Jesus' body. But even in their grief, they obeyed the law of Moses. They were devout Jews who followed Jesus. They were God followers, and they recognized Jesus as someone very special. Even if they did not get the big picture, they recognized Jesus as coming from God in a very special way. Okay, Luke 24, verses 1 through 3. Oh, I got to read you the title. He is risen. That's how I titled the beginning of this chapter. Verses 1 through 3. Early in the morning, on the first day of the week, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to Jesus' tomb. They found the stone had been rolled away from the opening of the tomb. When they entered the tomb, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. Can you imagine? These ladies went to the tomb in order to apply the spices that would help prevent the dead body from smelling so bad. When they get there, the stone has been rolled away. Do you think they were planning on asking the Roman soldiers to roll the stone away? I mean, they were the guards over the tomb. And can you imagine the shock they experienced to find the stone already rolled away and Jesus' body is gone? In verses 4 through 7, we read, while they were wondering about all of this, two men suddenly appeared next to them. The two men were wearing clothes that shone like lightning. The women were frightened and they bowed face down to the ground. But the men asked them, why are you looking for someone who is living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen. Do you remember what he told you when he was with you in Galilee? He said, the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners. He must be crucified, and he will rise on the third day. Oh, hallelujah. He is risen indeed. So while the women were in shock, all of a sudden, these two men in clothes as bright as lightning were standing next to them. Oh. All of a sudden, they went from, where's the body of Jesus, to, please don't hurt us, as they bowed to the ground, a sign of submission. When the men asked why they were looking for, and by the way, culturally speaking, do you understand why a lot of times the Bible refers to someone bowing face to the ground? Because when you bow like that, you can't defend yourself. The person you are bowing to could take a sword and stab you in the back, and you couldn't begin to stop him. It was a sign of submission. When these two men asked why they were looking for the living among the dead, do you think they were puzzled? Yeah. Then the men told them straight and clear, he has risen. Have you ever thought about how those two angels felt? What a great honor to be able to deliver their message. He has risen. If they had buttons on their robes, no doubt they would have burst their buttons right off their robes. Would the women now be asking each other, what do they mean? He's risen. What do they mean? Then the men reminded the ladies of what Jesus had already taught them. Where in this passage do you think the women started to understand? Well, they did. Because verses 8 through 12 say, then they remembered what Jesus had said. When they returned from the tomb, they told all of these things to the 11 and everyone else that had followed Jesus. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and other women who told all of this to the apostles. But the apostles did not believe the women because what they said seemed like nonsense. Peter ran to the tomb. He bent over to look in the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying by themselves. He left wondering about what had happened. The women had remembered what Jesus had taught them, and they went to tell the 11 disciples what happened, but the men didn't believe him. I mean, can you blame them? It doesn't make sense. Peter ran to the tomb, and he couldn't figure out what had happened. Now, imagine hearing this read for the first time, and you have no knowledge of the story. Wouldn't this break in the story drive you nuts? Luke, don't leave us hanging with Peter at the tomb. But that is what Luke does as he inserts a short story about two guys walking along the road. And a short lesson, but I'm going to stop right there. And next week we're going to begin with Luke 24, verses 13 through 16. Again, I challenge you, why don't you read the end of Luke 24 and see what happens. See if there's something that you've missed, that you've heard before or not heard before. See what you think about the end of Luke's gospel, because we will finish it next week. God bless you. I love you. You take care now. Bye.